we need enough sleep to consolidate our memories. If we don't get enough sleep to consolidate our memories, we're going to have cognitive issues. We're going to have recall issues. We're going to have storage issues. There's a lot of research coming out that shows that lack of sleep damages the brain. When we sleep, what happens is our blood pressure drops. And most people don't know that there's something called cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF, and it's like a shock cushion for our brain. There's fluid around it, and that acts as a buffer and a shock absorber. Now, what happens when we sleep is our blood pressure fluctuates. And what happens when it drops is the spinal fluid literally washes over our brain like our brain was in a self-cleaning cycle. And what happens is it's washing out all of the toxins and metabolites that build up because the brain is so metabolically active. And what this has shown is that the levels of the Alzheimer's proteins are lower when people get more sleep the night beforehand.
Hey there, I'm Amy Connell. Welcome to Graced Health, the podcast for women who want simple and grace-filled ways to take care of themselves and enjoy a little chocolate in the process. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach who wants you to know your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you're called to do. Question: do you ever forget things like your car keys or that friend's name from high school? Or maybe you walk into a particular room and think, what in the world did I come in here to do? I'm raising my hand on all of these. I am welcoming back to the show Dr. Richard Harris. If you have been listening for a little bit, you may have met him back in season 9 when he talked about the gut microbiome. And I got a lot of really great responses with that. And you'll hear why he is back for today, because it may seem like talking about cognitive health and the gut microbiome don't have a whole lot to do with each other. But I think you'll understand why he is so passionate about understanding the brain and how it works. Dr. Harris is a board certified internal medicine physician, and he's also a pharmacist. He attended the University of Texas at Austin for pharmacy school and then pursued medical education at the McGovern School of Medicine in Houston. He is a lifelong learner, which actually, I can't remember if we talked about this during the show or after, but just learning. He also completed his MBA at the University of Houston. He has just a depth of knowledge about so many different things. And I always really enjoy speaking with him and learning from him. He is truly what I would consider to be an online mentor. And I know you're really going to appreciate this. Now, before we get into this conversation, I do want to remind you of the resources page over at gracedhealth.com/resources. Whether you're looking for food, fitness, or faith-based support, I have you covered. You will find things like a 14-day devotional, on-the-go protein-powered breakfasts, how to enjoy shame-free health by breaking 8 rules, and then my latest workout offering, squat-free, strong legs for all of those people who just can't quite do squats anymore. I totally get it. Again, you can get those over at gracedhealth.com/resources. Okay, let's bring on Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back on the show, Amy. And please call me Richard. We're colleagues.
I don't know if colleagues is the right word, but okay, if you insist. Well, you know, it's hard for me to do that. I was saying to you before we got on that I feel like some medical practitioners know a lot about a little, and some know a little about a lot. And I feel like you know a lot about a lot. So I just want to honor the time that you invest in researching that. So it's really hard, but I'll just stick with Richard.
All right, there we go. It's funny. My wife tells me the same thing. She tries to find facts to stump me. And she asked about, what did she ask about? She asked me about something the other day. I can't remember. I was like, oh yeah, it's this. She goes, I'm so tired of living with you. And then she walked out of the room.
That's hysterical. Yeah. Yeah. I'm probably the annoying know it all in the house, though I don't know nearly as much as you. But yeah, I get a lot of eye rolls from my people for sure. For sure. Well, I hope that most of my community has listened to our conversation before on the gut microbiome. As of the more recent podcast that I've been putting out, that was a huge hit, and I had a lot of my community just reach out and say, "This was so good. Thank you so much for doing that." And I knew that I wanted to have a conversation with someone who knows a lot about cognitive health. And so I reached out to you saying, "Hey, do you know of anyone?" And you said, "Well, actually, this is something that's near and dear to my heart," which I knew, but I had just forgotten. So I was wondering if you could tell everybody a little about your story and how it relates to your passion for understanding cognitive health.
Sure. So before I even remembered wanting to be a physician, I actually saw two of my grandparents diminish and ultimately pass away from complications related to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And in both cases, they both had dementia. And I was a kid, it was just hard for me, but it was more so of, why is grandpa different? Why is grandma different? They're not the same person that I knew. And I was too young to really understand what these disease states were. But it was really hard for my parents watching them watch their parents wither away. And it was to the point where my grandfather, my dad's dad, when used to visit him before he passed, he didn't recognize my dad. He thought
Mm.
I was my dad when my dad was younger. So he would look at me and start talking to me about things that happened decades before I was born. And I would just be like, "Grandpa, that's not me. That's the other Richard." And he wouldn't even look at him. And I know that caused so much pain in his life, being those were the last memories that he has of his father. And, I have more memories of them being sick than I do of them being healthy. And
Wow.
it's really hard when you look back, and especially as I'm getting older, at all the things that they taught me. And most of the time I'm thinking about them being sick. But then you go forward in time to recently, when I started going on my holistic journey, I did a lot of blood testing, a lot of stool testing, micronutrient testing. I mean, I made myself a human pincushion because I wanted to test and get as much data about my body as possible before I started doing the same for other people. And I found out that I carry one of the ApoE4 genes. And for those who don't know, ApoE4, apolipoprotein, these are proteins that carry fats in our blood. This particular gene is the highest genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's that we know of currently. I believe that if you have the gene versus if you don't have the gene, if you have one copy of the gene, it's a 30% increased risk of developing Alzheimer's. If you have two copies of the gene, it's a 50% increased risk compared to the average general population risk. So this is a dramatic increase. And once I saw that, I said, okay, I need to learn everything I can possibly learn about brain health, because I don't believe the standard dogma that, oh, your mind's just supposed to deteriorate as you get older. Well, how many 100-year-olds do we see that are perfectly sharp, cognitively intact, still functioning? I'm like, well, if that's what's not supposed to happen, then they shouldn't be. But we see that all the time. And so I started to read and research and come up with a plan for my own brain health.
Wow. Yeah. Those are startling statistics. That's pretty incredible. So, okay, well, so you just talked about, sometimes we see 100-year-olds with, and I know you talk a lot on your Strive for Great Health podcast about the blue zones, and about how they're just thriving. Basically, it's those who are aging really well and old, but still doing very well physically and mentally. So, talk to me a little bit about the natural progression of our brain as we age and what is normal and what might not be.
hmm Yeah. So as we get older, it becomes a little bit harder for us to recall information. It's not that we forget the information, it's a little bit more work for us to recall it. And so sometimes it's not that we forget it, it's just that we can't bring it up to top of memory as quickly. And
Why is that?
that's a normal part of aging. As our brain goes on, we're constantly making new connections, Brain is changing. It's a whole field called neuroplasticity. Dr. Andrew Huberman out of Stanford is a guru in this. He's a great guy. I'm trying to get him on my podcast, but he's a really fantastic guy who does a lot of this research. And so what happens as we get older is the brain starts to change the way it prioritizes information. And so it becomes a little bit harder for us to sometimes pull something from our memory storage into our working memory, because there's different aspects of memory, right? There's the storage, right? The things that we've learned before that we may need to apply, but they're not currently applicable to our working memory. These are the things that are top of mind. What are we doing in the tasks around us? And so usually when we have trouble recalling something, it's because it was something outside of the current task that we're in, right? Or the current environment that we're in. And then someone asks us a question, and then we have to pull something from our memory storage into our working memory. And so that can be a part of just normal aging, where you forget someone's name, you can't bring it up to memory, and then 2 minutes later it comes back, or you misplace your car keys or things like that. And that's completely normal. That's normal aging. Now, what's not is when we start to progress from normal aging, or sometimes what's called mild cognitive impairment, to dementia status. And that's when we start to see dramatic alterations in personality, memory, also movement in some cases. And so there's a lot more dysfunction that's going on than just a subtle misplacement of information. I think that's the best way that I can describe it. So it's completely normal to subtly misplace information. I'm in my 30s, I do it.
Yeah.
It happens, and we all do that. But you have to think about all the information as you get older that we've had to learn and store in our brains. And all the information is stored somewhere. And so the brain goes through pruning cycles to remove what's necessary or remove what's unnecessary, keep what's necessary. And so the older you get, just think about a computer, right? An older computer has tons and tons and tons and tons of files and tons of space taken up. And even though you've cleaned it out, there's still residual things there, because that's just part of the system, right? It's never fully deleted from the computer. There's always a trace. And it's the same kind of thing in our memories, where we never fully delete something. We just may devote less resources to it.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is the recall issue might be just because it's kind of stored farther back, or it might be because we're not in that zone. So like an example that comes to mind is a friend texted me. She's always given me ideas for this podcast, actually. And she was like, okay, this is what I want to know. She said, Fleetwood Mac is one of my all-time favorite bands. And she said, I was in my car driving to a bar class, and there was, I don't remember which one it was, but it was a Fleetwood Mac song came on. And she said, and I knew that I loved it, and I could not remember the lead singer. And she said, and I sat there, and she was like, even though I had on my phone, where I could look it up, she said, I just forced myself to do that. But what I'm hearing you say is, well, that's normal because it's an all-time favorite band, and she hasn't been thinking about it. And her brain was in the zone of, I'm going to class and I got to make sure that I'm on the speed limit, like doing all the things that we're driving, rather than, it's just not going to be there easily accessible. Is that a good example of like a real life thing, and then what you're talking about, what's happening from a neuroplasticity?
Sure, absolutely.
Did I use that word right?
Yeah, because it's not always in the top of our mind, even if it's our favorite thing or another. It may not be something that we think about for weeks. Fleetwood Mac is a great band, but how often are you hearing Fleetwood Mac songs played on the radio these days? Or coming through your shuffle list? How many songs do we have on our shuffle list? I mean, my shuffle list goes from something that a 2-year-old would listen to like a 100-year-old would listen to, and everywhere in between. So again, as we've expanded the realm of knowledge and memory that we have to keep, it's not uncommon for these recall issues to happen.
Okay.
And like you said earlier, this makes perfect sense. She was in a context where there was a lot that she had to pay attention to. All right. Working memory is not infinite. It's finite. It requires resources. It's like RAM on a computer, right? There's only so much active material your computer can display at once. And some computers have more RAM than others, and some of them have faster processors and things like that. It's the same with our brains. And so if you're focused on something like, for instance, driving, which can be a life-threatening situation, you're going to devote a lot of resources to that. And then recalling the lead singer of your favorite band is not a really high priority in that situation when you're in a situation that you know can be life-threatening.
Okay. All right. So that is really comforting to know. And one takeaway might be for my listeners of, because we all have those moments of like, am I losing my mind? I mean, is this the beginning of my memory loss? And so it might be like, okay, what's the situation right now? What is my brain focused on? What, and kind of applying some of those things to like, is this really something that might be a problem, or might it just be because I'm focused on something else?
Right. And usually if it's a dementia type issue, you start to see decline in all aspects of memory in all types of situations. So it's not like domain or context dependent, or it's not something that is crucial, right? It's not like she forgot how to drive, right? That would be a sign of a very significant issue in memory.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about I know these words are sometimes used interchangeably, and I don't believe that they actually mean the same thing. So can you clear up the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
Sure. So if you had to say, the overarching heading of these disease states would be neurodegenerative diseases, basically brain degenerative diseases. So what happens in these states is you get damage to brain cells, and that leads to a disease state. And so that would be the heading. And then under that heading, you have things like dementia, which would be the next heading. And what dementia means is that there's a global disturbance in the way that we process memory and information. And so under that, there would be things like Alzheimer's, which is the most popularized form of dementia. There are movies about it, there are books about it. Most people know someone, or either personally or a friend or family member who had a family member or loved one who had dementia. And unfortunately, Alzheimer's rates are supposed to triple by 2050. That's quite scary, because I think it's the sixth leading cause of death right now. If COVID might have messed up those numbers a little bit, but I think it's somewhere around there. Fifth or sixth leading cause of death is dementia. But Alzheimer's is a specific type of dementia. And so there are other types. There's frontal temporal dementia, which is mainly associated with behavioral changes. There's Lewy body dementia, which kind of resembles Parkinson's a little bit. They get more dementia than movement issues, but they still have movement issues. There's Parkinson's dementia, which is, of course, associated with movement issues, but you also get some cognitive issues. There's vascular dementia, which is a condition where basically you get clogging in the arteries in the brain. And because of that, there's less blood flow. And because there's less blood flow, there's damage to certain high blood flow, high traffic areas. And that can lead to a dementia. And then there's even new types of dementia that we're just finding, genetic types of dementia. So there's a lot of research being going on in this area to figure out, hey, is all dementia the same? And even Alzheimer's, we think of, or used to think of, as one disease state. Now we realize it's actually multiple disease states depending on the cause. And there's at least 5 different causes of Alzheimer's, and they're different, but they result in the same clinical state.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So a better catch-all word is just like dementia, or the what'd you call it? Neurogenetic disease. Is that what you
neurodegenerative disease?
I can't read my writing. Sorry. Rather than Alzheimer's. I didn't realize there were so many facets of it. That's really interesting. Okay. Now, as a holistic provider, and as someone that you are, and then as for me, because I tune into your show, I know that I have to imagine that food and exercise and sleep play a huge role in this. So I was wondering if you could talk us through a little bit about that.
The number one condition I see, especially in younger people, when they say, man, my memory just isn't what I used to be. And I would say, okay, how stressed are you? Honestly, How stressed
Ah,
are you?
stress. Okay.
Because most people will be like, I'm not that bad. I'm like, honestly, tell me, how stressed are you? And they're like, yeah, I'm pretty stressed out. Here's why this matters. So, if you think about our stress response, right? Our stress response is designed to make us run from a tiger or, a warring tribe that's trying to hurt us, right? This was the stressors back then. It wasn't, oh, someone said something negative about me on social media.
Right.
They didn't have that, right? So what happens is when we get a surge in cortisol, the stress hormone, one of the things cortisol will do is it shuts off our frontal lobe, our decision making areas. So we're not thinking about, oh, this Monet is beautiful because of the color synergy and the brush strokes. We're thinking about, I need to run. Which direction am I going to run in? Right? It simplifies the order of thinking. Now, also, what it does is it shuts off memory consolidation. So, memory consolidation is the act of our brain putting memories into long term storage. And this makes sense because that's a highly energetic process. It takes a lot of energy. We're constantly doing that all day.
Mm-hmm.
And more so when we sleep is the final pull together. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it doesn't make sense to devote energy to consolidating memories if you're not going to be alive to consolidate those memories. And so
Right.
what happens is we switch our brains from that higher level thinking into more primitive level thinking, survive, run, get away. And so this is why you hear all the time, and I don't know why people don't make this connection more, that when you go through a really stressful event, what's the thing that people always say? I don't remember. I was like, well, how do you not remember? That was a crazy event. It's like I really don't remember. It's like flashes. I can't put it all together. And people sometimes have to go to therapy to unlock those memories because they're there. It's just not in a way that we're used to consolidating them because of the effect of stress. So that's the number one thing is if you feel like your memory has taken a hit, stress reduction, stress
Right.
management. It's so important for that. And meditation's actually been shown to improve cognition, improve memory, of course, reduce stress. And this is in studies. And it actually changes the way our brain structure and it changes our brain function. And it's something so simple that you can do. Of course, exercise is important. Our brain is about 2% of our body weight and gets 20% of the blood flow. Now think
Mm-hmm.
about that. 2% by weight, 20% by blood flow. Why? It's so metabolically active. It's the third most metabolically active organ behind the heart and the kidneys. And so your brain is constantly chewing up energy. It needs blood flow. But so if you're not exercising, if your vascular health is not great, you're not going to be able to regulate your blood flow enough to get your brain more blood flow when it needs it. And so that's one of the reasons why exercise is beneficial. Exercise also changes the way our brains work because we get serotonin and dopamine and all those happy neurochemicals, just endorphins bathing in our brain. And so if you're happy, you're not stressed, your brain's going to have a better memory. And then, of course, nutrition is so important. It's like I always tell people we are all Ferraris. We are all wonderfully made, very complex, very, very expensive systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most people treat themselves like Kias. And I'm not bashing Kia. Kia makes a great car. But if someone's going to hand you the keys to a Ferrari or the keys to a Kia, you're taking the keys to the Ferrari, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so what do they put in Ferraris? They put racing grade fuel in Ferraris. They don't go to the 7-Eleven on the corner and fuel that up. So most people are putting 7-Eleven gas in their Ferrari instead of racing fuel. And so the racing fuel is our nutrient dense foods. And this makes a big difference for numerous reasons: the building blocks, the effects on the microbiome, insulin resistance, inflammation. All of these things can impact your cognitive ability.
Yeah. That's such a great example. One of the questions that I actually didn't prepare you for, but you probably have an answer, is what kind of effects are um, is all of our mobile technology having on our brain? I mean, I feel like my friend, let's go back to the Fleetwood Mac example. She could have very easily pulled out her Shazam app and gotten the name of the band or the singer or whatever. You can get anything you want in the palm of your hand within about 0.5 seconds. So is that playing any kind of role on our either recall or just general cognitive health or memory? Do you know if there's any studies about the relationships between those two?
So this is actually quite interesting. After we get off this, I'm recording a digital wellness episode. I just did like a 4-hour dive in the literature about the effects of social media and cell phones on our mental health. So it's actually quite interesting. I'm a big believer in this philosophy because one of my physics professors told it to me. He said, Richard, never memorize anything that you can look up in 2 seconds. And the reason for that is because we are a limited hard drive space. So it's more important to keep the information there that is not as easily retrievable as information that is easily retrievable. And so I always thought that was kind of interesting. And that's one of the ways I've lived my life. But there is an intersection between digital devices and our memory because there is data that shows that, and this is mainly in teens and adolescents, that the longer you spend on your device, the lower you rate your satisfaction with life. And if you have a lower satisfaction with life, you're more likely to be anxious, depressed, and have low self-esteem. If you're anxious, depressed, and have low self-esteem, your memory is not going to be that great. Your cognition is not going to be that great. Your impulse control is not going to be that great. And so there is a link there between our devices, but it's really about how often we're using the device and how much we use the device, and then why we're using the device, right? The device is a tool. A tool can either be good or bad depending on how you're using the tool. And so I think a lot of people are just using those tools incorrectly, spending too much time on them, and that's leading to issues. But as far as having a wealth of information at our fingertips, I don't know of any studies specifically that have looked at that in overall memory capacity. I would think, and I'm just talking about me here, I've been able to get more information quickly and remember it quickly and apply it quickly because of all the ways that we have to retain information now. And whenever I, get my information, I always think of something, well, what is this pertinent to? I link it. I'm like, oh, this is pertinent to this. And that's how I remember it. And so for me, it's been great. It's been a definite boon in my memory and my ability to help people out because of it.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not necessarily a direct correlation, but our use of it and why we're going to it. Are we going to zone out or to numb, or all of a sudden are we comparing whatever we have to whatever, to other people's highlight reel, all that kind of stuff. And that can cause that lower satisfaction, that can cause more of a, mental health issues. And then that can impact memory.
Absolutely. I mean,
okay.
You look at people who are anxious and depressed, they have memory issues, they have fatigue issues. And that's because, over time, this leads to maladaptive changes in the brain that can impair memory, impair decision making, and these type of things. So it all depends on how you use the tool. I bet if the research was done on that, it would really depend on why people were picking up their cell phone. Because most of the time I pick up my cell phone to get information.
Yeah.
I don't pick it up to just, zone out or lose time or scroll through people's best of reels.
Right. Like all the mindless scrolling for sure. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Actually, to me, that is really comforting because I'm like you. I mean, I pick it up because I'm looking for something or, my husband and I now have this joke of, we'll say something like, well, I wonder, or do you know? And we're like, if only we had something in the palm of our hands that we could look up, but we do, we look it up and then we know. So it's nice to know that is not negatively impacting our memory or, our brain health in the terms of memory. Or cognition. So that's good. That's comforting to me. All right. This is good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about general signs of dementia. Now, you did mention is it affecting everything, not just one aspect? But can you help us understand a little bit about what to look for, maybe particularly in the early stages?
Yeah, the early stages, it's really hard to tell unless you do in-depth psychological and cognitive evaluation,
Okay.
because it's just going to look like that mild cognitive impairment where people, seem just a little bit forgetful, right? It's nothing harmful. They're not forgetting how to drive. They're not forgetting how to walk. They're not forgetting where they're going. They're not just getting in the car and just ending up, oh, how did I get here? Right. They're not to that stage. It just seems a little forgetful, but everything else seems okay. And then it's usually something like, people will start to say, grandma or grandpa is saying a lot of weird stuff these days, or you start to see errors in their finances, or you come to the house and things are just kind of off and disheveled, right? And so you're starting to see things that are abnormal for that person's character and what you think of that person. And that's usually when you start to think of, okay, this may be something a little bit more than just some cognitive issues. But then you also have to look into it. It may not be dementia. You have to see, are there things that are impacting their cognitive function, like stress, like exercise, like nutrition, like toxins? Especially where I live here in Texas, there's a lot of mold toxins, and 20% of the population is very sensitive to mycotoxins, where you can get all different types of chronic inflammatory symptoms. Or is it that they don't have enough trophic factors, feeding factors for the brain? So when we get older, lower sex hormone levels, testosterone in men and progesterone in women, these things are also associated with our normal brain function. Is it a vitamin D problem? Because that can be associated with it. Do they have evidence of insulin resistance? Because if you have insulin resistance and you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, then your brain cannot effectively turn that sugar into energy. And if your brain can't generate energy, you're going to have cognitive problems. So it's really getting down to the root and saying, is this something that's a neurodegenerative disease, or is this something that is a metabolic or some other process, or trophic process or infective process that's causing this?
Okay. So if you're starting to wonder, or, if you're starting to see this in your family, it might not necessarily be dementia, but there might be some other underlying causes to get checked out. And I assume you recommend seeing um, holistic providers like yourself, functional medicine, that type of thing.
Correct, because if you don't, they're just going to put you on medication, which does not impact overall survivability or anything like that, and doesn't address the root cause. And so you need to get to the root cause. I mean, we've seen this time and time again where people have Alzheimer's, you put them on a ketogenic diet and they dramatically improve. Or they have Alzheimer's, you do the testing and no, they have mycotoxins. You get those mycotoxins out, they dramatically improve. Or I had a case where someone actually had chronic Lyme disease, and you treated the chronic Lyme disease and that person dramatically improved. So
Wow.
again, these things that conventional medicine says, oh, this is just Alzheimer's, this is just your brain deteriorating. Well, it may not be. There are things that can mimic the degeneration of nerve cells, right? Just because those nerve cells aren't able to generate energy, that's going to be dysfunction. Or if there's an infection, there's going to be dysfunction. Or if there's inflammation, there's going to be dysfunction. And it's really figuring out which is which. And there's a really excellent book called The End of Alzheimer's by Dale Bredesen. And he talks about this. And he's got a follow-up book too that outlines a couple more causes. I just can't remember the name of it right now. But he's a researcher who's looked into how do we evaluate people holistically with memory issues and get to the root cause and address those. And they've seen, in him and other people I know have seen, dramatic improvements in people based upon addressing the root cause.
Wow. Well, and that's really encouraging too. I mean, I know I have had circumstances in my life and health, issues with my people. And to me, the most empowering thing is walking out, knowing that I can do something, and for this child in particular, it was like changing the diet and taking some things out. And that really helped him. So, I think that that is really empowering too, to know that it might not be that. And, that we can probably, or we can do something different, or at least explore other options rather than just being like, well, it's Alzheimer's. I guess this is just the new path. So, okay. Talk to me a little bit as we close up. What are some of our best practices that you would recommend for keeping that our brain as sharp as long as possible?
Yeah, and we didn't touch on maybe the most important one, which is sleep. And
Yeah, I
there's
did want to ask about that. Let's talk about that.
this is some really fascinating research that's come out recently. Number one, there was a study that came out last year that showed that before the age of 2, we mainly sleep as a way to grow new nerve tissue and brain tissue and all of that. Now, after the age of 2, the main function of sleep is memory consolidation. And now there's some debate about memory consolidation. Some of it happens during the day and some of it happens at night. And it seems to be that different processes are happening, but we need enough sleep to consolidate our memories. If we don't get enough sleep to consolidate our memories, we're going to have cognitive issues. We're going to have recall issues. We're going to have storage issues. And the other thing is, this is really, really fascinating. There's a lot of research coming out that shows that lack of sleep damages the brain. And this is how it damages the brain. When we sleep, what happens is our blood pressure drops. And most people don't know that there's something called cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF, and it's like a shock cushion for our brain, right? Our brain is not right up there to the edge of our skull, right? That's not what it is.
Okay.
There's fluid around it, and that acts as a buffer and a shock absorber. Now, what happens when we sleep is our blood pressure it fluctuates, and what happens when it drops is the spinal fluid literally washes over our brain like our brain was in a self-cleaning cycle. This is a super cool study. And what happens is it's washing out all of the toxins and metabolites that build up because the brain is so metabolically active. And what this has shown is that the levels of the Alzheimer's proteins are lower when people get more sleep the night beforehand. So it helps our bodies clear out the bad protein, the tau and the neurotangles and things like that that build up in Alzheimer's. So that's why sleep is so important. And then you can go on to other things. How can dysregulated sleep lead to cognitive issues? Well, it messes up our sex hormones. It messes up our thyroid hormones. It makes you more insulin resistant. These are all things that can impact your cognition. It increases your stress hormones. So it's so important that we prioritize sleep. We get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And that's where the research shows it's the most beneficial, is optimal. Less than 6 is too little. More than 9 likely means that there's some underlying condition going on that your body's trying to recover from, and it's making you sleep more. And so that's a sign that there's something that we need to investigate, because your body's trying to repair from something if you're sleeping more than 9 hours consistently. And then it's nutrition, single ingredient, nutrient dense foods. It's exercise. It's mindfulness, making sure we don't stress. It's the digital wellness, putting down the social media, engaging with others. There's actually data in teens that show that the highest use of social media is associated with thinning in certain areas of the brain. It changes the structure and function of our brain. So that
Wow.
digital wellness is very important for a lot of different reasons. And then it's doing things like avoiding toxins, right? Making sure that we're not using toxic household products and toxic cleaners, and our air is clean. The water that we're drinking is clean. So there's a lot that goes into it. But if I had to say the 3 most important things
Mm-hmm.
are sleep, exercise, nutrition. And that's probably overall the 3 most important things of all the healthy things that you can do. Those 3 are really important for our brain health.
It's funny. I with the guests who I know are believers, I will pray with them before. And I think I mentioned this in our prayer before. Like, it's just so amazing to me, the intricacies of our body and how God just made us. And we're learning so much about it and the science and the research that's involved. And it's mind blowing. It really is. And so I think it's super cool, which is a really simplistic way of saying it. And I'm really grateful that you were able to come on and share all of this with us. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that I did not mention? And I'm so glad you brought up sleep, because I did want to ask about that and I didn't bring it up. Anything else that you wish people knew, understood, did in terms of cognitive health?
Yeah, it's one of those things that your brain, if you don't use it, you literally lose it. And this is something I did my research on when I was in college, is neurons. I researched neurons for 2 years, and especially in memory. And the way memory neurons work is they need to be stimulated. So if you're not stimulating your memory neurons, then they kind of go dormant. And once they go completely dormant, you can't reactivate them. So it's just lost space. And so one of the things that I see people do is they don't spend enough time on self-development. People don't read books anymore. People don't watch lectures anymore. People think that once they're out of school, oh, I'm done learning. Our brains are not designed for that. Our brains are designed to constantly take in new information and to be learning and to be growing. And so if you want your brain to be healthy, you have to use it. It's the same thing like your muscles. If you want your muscles to be healthy, you have to use your muscles. If you want your brain to be healthy, you have to use your brain. And it doesn't take much. Those brain training games and things like that, it's something that's just enough to make you think. A lot of times we go around through the day on autopilot, and then our spare time we're like, well, I don't want to think. Well, if there's something that you have to like, there's something that you like doing. Yeah, well, I like gardening. Okay, well then go learn something about gardening, right? It doesn't have to be what anybody else says is important. It's what do you like? Okay, well, learn something about it. Continue to grow, continue to advance. And I think that's something that we need to get out of that state, that once we're out of school, we're done learning. You're never done learning. And if you want your brain to be healthy, always learn new things. And that's what the really successful people do. That's what a lot of these octogenarians do. They'll talk about they've had like 20 different careers in their life. Even in their like 70s and 80s, they picked up a new career or a new hobby or something because they wanted to learn, they wanted to grow, they wanted to challenge ourselves. We need a sense of purpose as human beings. It's such a strong part of who we are, and it's such a strong motivator for our health of our mind, body, and spirit. And that's one of the things that I see people do is just kind of just give up. They give up learning new things. They say this is good enough. But that's not how we were designed. We weren't designed to be good enough. We were designed to always continue striving to be a little bit better than we were the day before.
The other thing too, as you're talking, I feel like once I was out of school, and maybe this meant that I was not in the right degree program, but then I was like, now I can really focus on the things that I love learning about. And I mean, to your point, I have a finance degree and I actually really enjoyed that. And I used it and I did product marketing and all that kind of stuff. And the health part has been kind of more of a phase 2 and 3 type thing. So yeah, it's totally different. It has definitely been using my brain in different ways, particularly with the science stuff, because I was never great at science. But it's a good opportunity once you get out of school to, if nothing else, have the space or I don't want to say the time. Of course, we choose how we spend our time, but to explore other areas that maybe we didn't necessarily like fit into in getting our degree or getting our job, but it's a great place to learn number for sure. All right. Thank you for your time. This has been awesome. You have, I think to me as the takeaway, let's number one, get our sleep in, let's manage our stress, let's eat, you call them single ingredient foods. I tend to use the word whole foods, but I think it's, same thing. Let's move and exercise. And, I love how, this is what I love. I love how we had a conversation about the gut microbiome, and a lot of the information translates from your gut to your brain and obviously to your heart and everything else. Like all roads lead back to eating well and moving your body and getting enough sleep and managing your stress.
Absolutely. They're all connected. What's good for the gut is good for the brain. And especially since there's a gut brain axis, we didn't even talk about that, but the vagus nerve directly connects your gut to your brain. And so your gut and brain are very intricately linked. And that's why people with gut issues tend to have cognitive issues, and people with cognitive issues tend to have gut issues. That's why the two go hand in hand. So it's a great point. We need to stop thinking about things in domain dependence. Like, oh, we're just doing heart health. Well, my heart's fine, so I don't need to do that stuff. Well, no, you still need to do that stuff because it's good for the rest of your body. And we too often get involved in the marketing scheme to where, oh, everybody's like, hey, yeah, breast cancer, we need to do something about breast cancer. Okay, well, preventing cancer, what's good for preventing cancer is the same thing that's good for helping your brain. Right, but we don't link these together because we're so used to the American Heart Association just talking about the heart, and the breast cancer awareness talking about breast cancer only. So that's the way we tend to think about health, that organs are in silos, but they all talk to each other. There's so many different connections. And I guess the last thing I want to say is there are some really cool and innovative tools that you can use. Like, one of the things that I refer people to all the time is something called brainhq.com. And it's just different ways to train your brain. Just like you'd exercise your body, this is a way that you can exercise your brain.
Awesome. I'll put a link for that in the show notes. And then tell everybody how they can get in touch with you. And I would love for you to say, because you kind of do a lot of different things. Tell everybody a little bit about what services you do for consumer related, like people in my community.
Sure. So I have all different kinds of things. I have online wellness courses. If you want to know all about lifestyle medicine, the stuff that we talked about today, we didn't even talk about fasting. Fasting is also good for your brain. That's another thing as well. And that's what I outline in the course. It's everything I know about lifestyle medicine, how we go about adding to our little health savings account. Everything we do throughout the day either adds to our health or subtracts from our health. And I want to make sure that we have much more or many more additions to that account than subtractions. And then I do a lot of diagnostic testing, like micronutrient testing, food allergy testing, GI mapping to figure out what's going on there. Those are some of my favorite tests that I do. And then, I have the podcast as well. And so the podcast is just really out there to get you some information and change your associations with health. Just like we talked about today, getting people to realize that it's all connected. And so what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Digital wellness is good for my mental health, but because it's good for my mental health, it's also good for my physical health and my spiritual health.
And that's the Strive for Great Health podcast. You know this, but just in case people don't know that. Okay, so they can, and if they just wanted, where would you have people go to kind of your home base and to learn a little bit more about all of these programs?
Yeah, you can head to my website, theghwellness.com. And there you can even email me from the website. It has links to all my socials. I just got on Pinterest. My wife's been telling me for a while I need to get on Pinterest. So follow me on Pinterest. It'll make my wife happy.
That's good. That's funny. I've actually been thinking that that's a space that I need to invest a little bit more time in. So I'll go find you and follow you for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, your wisdom, and you coming back and just sharing all of that with me and my community.
Thank you for having me. Y'all have a blessed day.
Okay. For all of you who have thought, am I losing my mind? Is my memory starting to go? I hope you're feeling better. If it turns out that you're just having recall issues, and if your brain is just not prioritizing the name of the band or whatever it is that you are trying to figure out, that was really good for me to hear. And I know my friend is really going to appreciate it as well. If you have not listened to the Strive for Great Health podcast, I highly recommend it. Dr. Harris really does a deep dive into particularly all of his solo episodes. He actually was telling me when we were done that for every 30-minute episode he puts out, he spends about 3 to 4 hours researching. It is high quality, rich content. And for those of you who love to get geeky about things, and I say that in the most positive way because I love to get geeky about things too, but that is a fantastic podcast. Go check it out, Strive for Great Health podcast. And I will post the link to the one he did on Alzheimer's down below, because he did get into significantly more detail than what we talked about today. And I think that if you found this conversation interesting, that you will really find that one even more so. Don't forget to check out the resources page over at gracedhealth.com/resources. I really try and have a little something for everyone over there. Okay, what's the one simple thing I want you to remember about today's episode? This is something I try and do every week, because I don't know about you, but when I listen to, sometimes when I listen to something that's like got a lot of really good information, I have a hard time compartmentalizing it and remembering everything. And so I try and boil that down to one simple thing. So if you walk away with nothing else, what's the one simple thing? And that is sleep. Sleep is critical to our memory and to our cognitive health. And side note, if you listen to the solo episode I did back in season 9 on rest and recovery, you know how important it is to our physical health as well. Sleep is not something that we just do passively. It's an active step in achieving our overall health. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a great day.